thank you for coming. And thank you to our 4 competitors. We had a drawing earlier this evening, and the order will be Miss Elena Neighbors is first, followed by Miss Haley Hasek, Mr. Michael Hoffman, and Mr. Marshall Leary. And to introduce Miss Neighbors first, she says that she is greeting you from the great land of good food in Louisiana. She is the middle child of the Furious Five. This is her second and last year with Kepler, as she is graduating this May, but she has enjoyed her experience immensely. And this evening, she is presenting a speech, and it is called Take Pains, Save Lives. Miss Neighbors.
Thank you. Elena's doing what? I asked. My brother was hosting a blood drive at our church and was doing some promoting to get more participants. While doing this, he just happened to list my name as one of those participants, despite me not having signed up for it. It was shortly thereafter that I was told that apparently I was giving blood. Now, hopefully, you never have to experience something like this. Hopefully, you volunteer to give blood because you want to. It could be for many different reasons, but there are those out there who would not give blood at all, and I will never understand those people, so I seek to convert them. Blood will always be in high demand because there are only so many people who can donate, and so many people every year need it for various procedures. Donating blood is hardly painful and is much better than the alternative of being in pain and needing blood. Lastly, you will never know what the future holds, and although you hope to never need blood, you may end up requiring donated blood to live. Before you can donate, you do have to go through a screening process and answer a lot of questions. If anyone here has ever given blood, you'll remember how soft and ridiculous some of those questions were. And as Christians, of course, we breeze through the whole section with a firm, hell no. This makes us one of the most obvious choices to be a donor, and we should be willing and ready to give some of our strength to those in need. Only 38% of the population are eligible to donate, so if you are able, you are a selected minority. Obviously, not all of those 38% are donating. It's actually close to only 3% of eligible people who are donating, which is exactly why there is a shortage of blood. Every time you donate, you can save up to 3 lives and swell the number of donors. If that's not enough motivation, then I don't know what is. The alternative, though, is that if you aren't giving blood, there are many people who suffer without it. That begs the question, are lives more important than a little bit of pain? I think the answer to this is obvious, but the numbers I mentioned previously disagree. Why are so many people unwilling to face a minuscule amount of physical harm to save lives and families? There are many good and honorable things that require pain. People in the army, mothers giving birth, firefighters, policemen, all of those people are ready to face pain to save lives. Are you? Can you do a small act to save a life? You may not know it, but not only could you save lives, you could save families. Think about all those people who have to watch their loved one suffer because of blood shortage. You could be the one to fix that. You could always be one of the people experiencing blood shortage one day. Maybe then you would hope that more people would be donors, that more people would do the honorable thing with only a small amount of pain for themselves, that more people would make themselves a little uncomfortable. These days, unfortunately, anything that makes us remotely uncomfortable has to go. There's absolutely no reason why I should ever be uncomfortable. As glamorous as that might sound, car wrecks are uncomfortable and often unavoidable. You never planned on that uncomfy situation, I suppose. But say you were in one and you needed blood, but oh no, there's a blood shortage, and your doctors have to search for a donor. This could all be avoided if more people, including yourself, donated blood. That way, when accidents do inevitably happen, there is blood on hand to be administered to you and save your life. Some people make the excuse that they are afraid of needles. But when everyone starts making that excuse to get out of it, it starts to become less and less believable. I do have a solution for this, though. Many people don't realize this is an option. Simply don't look at the needle. This works for most people, but for people it does not. There will be time to face fears, and the sooner the better in this case. Others will say that they do not plan on needing blood, so they don't donate. While it is true that you could be one of the fortunate to never need blood, that does not change the fact that there are other people who do need blood and who are dying without it. I'm very glad that you never plan on needing blood. I'm pretty sure most of us do. Sadly, we have no control over that, and a wrench may be thrown in your plans. What is more, some people like the idea of their blood, dislike the idea of their blood floating around and being injected into other people. For this argument, I have almost no words. If everyone thought like this, no one would ever survive if they needed blood or kidney transplant or something of that sort. There is no substitute for human blood, and your body is designed to make plenty of it. Once someone has been given your blood, it will not stay there forever. The person's body will cycle through it. You will have made new blood cells, and everything will be like it was before for the both of you. If it seems so horrible and painful to you to donate blood, choose for yourself what you will do, whether you will save lives or keep to yourself, whether you value life in general or your own life. As for me, I will give blood, save lives, and joyfully serve my fellow image bearers.
Our next speaker this evening is Haley Hasek, and she is also greeting you from the state of Louisiana, where she has lived her entire life. She has been a student of Kepler for 4 years, and she has enjoyed the Old Western Culture series the best. Her closest friend is her younger sister, and this evening she is presenting a speech called Bring Back the Bard. Miss Haley Hasek.
Ignorance is the curse of God. Knowledge is the wing wherewith we fly to heaven. William Shakespeare. Throughout the decades, Shakespeare has been taught in every prestigious university in the country, but those days are gone. In a 2015 survey, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni discovered that, quote, the vast majority of the top universities in the US do not require English majors to take a single course on Shakespeare, unquote. What has happened to our schools that they should overlook perhaps the most brilliant playwright of all time? We have abandoned the traditional model for liberal arts schools. This model emphasized the classic literature that shaped Western culture, authors such as Plato, Dante, Milton, or Dickens. Instead, our colleges today would rather read authors from their own time period. In her article, Why Are American Universities Shying Away from the Classics?, Ashley Thorne states, the faculty and administrators seem to think that unless the living author can stroll into the classroom and explain what she had for breakfast this morning, the students will be unable to relate to her written words. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Shakespeare has much to teach students about the nature of life and the human experience. His writings are like a rich field filled with good things to eat. But the modern universities have allowed this field to grow thick with weeds. We must rebuild the garden. Colleges in the US should return to a traditional liberal arts model and require their students to study Shakespeare. In order to argue this, I intend to lay out 3 ways that Shakespeare benefits students. He teaches students the art of storytelling, develops their ability to comprehend, and helps them to better understand the key themes of Christianity. As Christian students and educators, this is all the more reason for us to advocate a revival of Shakespeare in our colleges. Firstly, Shakespeare teaches students the art of storytelling. There is deep symbolism and hidden meaning to be found within Shakespeare's plays. Every detail counts. Nothing is by accident. Let's take just one example from King Lear. In the play, Lear gives 2 separate monologues that are connected by a unique repetition. The first monologue declares the deceitful nature of riches. At the end of the monologue, Lear exclaims, now, 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 now. Later on, Lear begs to be allowed to stay in prison. At the start of this monologue, he cries, no, 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 no. The similar repetition links the 2 passages together and gives us a deeper understanding of what is happening here. In the first passage, Lear spoke of those who would plate sin with gold. In the second passage, he speaks of gilded butterflies. Lear wants to do the very thing he scorned before. He is hiding his sins behind a layer of pretended riches. By this subtle connection, Shakespeare opens a world of deeper meanings. And this is only one instance of his masterful storytelling. By reading Shakespeare, students learn more about what it means to be a good storyteller who lets no detail go to waste. Reading the plays of Shakespeare also develops students' ability to comprehend poetry and difficult texts. Studying Shakespeare is far from easy, but the more one does it, the easier it becomes. It is like going to the gym. At first, you can barely move because you're so sore, but as you continue to visit the gym, the soreness gets better and better, and pretty soon you aren't very sore at all. When students read difficult texts like Shakespeare, they're giving their brains a workout. They're building mind muscle. And the great thing about this mind muscle is that it is long-term. It doesn't expire. The work that students put into reading Shakespeare now will pay off in the future. Not only will Shakespeare become easier to understand, but so will every other work of literature that they encounter. Once students have scaled the heights of Macbeth, Hamlet, and Henry V, they will find that a world of literature is open to them, and they will be able to face it undaunted. Perhaps most important of all, Shakespeare helps students to better comprehend some key themes of Christianity. Whether or not Shakespeare was a Christian himself, his plays contain distinctly Christian parallels. For instance, let's look at the cosmological worldview found in The Merchant of Venice. The play takes place in 3 locations: Venice, Belmont, and Shylock's house. These 3 locations make up a cosmos. Venice represents the city of man, or earth. Belmont represents the city of God, or heaven, and Shylock's house represents hell. How these 3 interact in the course of the play gives us a clear picture of the gospel. Portia, the mistress of Belmont, becomes the Christ figure in the story. She enters into Venice, the city of man, in order to save the sinner. It is far too easy for us as Christians to become dull to the story of salvation. Tales like The Merchant of Venice reawaken our fear and wonder at what we have forgotten. It is one thing to speak vaguely of deserving death. It is quite another to picture Shylock poised with his knife, ready to carve a pound of flesh from Antonio's chest. Students of Shakespeare will be moved by this picture to consider their own helpless fate and rejoice at the salvation of Christ. There are some who might object that not every student has the ability to understand and enjoy Shakespeare's plays, especially in this modern age, when the language of Shakespeare's time is so different from our own. In answer to this, I would argue that there is an abundance of resources for the modern day student. Never before has the common person had access to so many websites, articles, videos, and books that can give him the tools he needs to better comprehend Shakespeare. And when the fruit of such labor is so sweet, why wouldn't we be willing to push our students beyond their comfort zones? The hard work that they put into learning Shakespeare will teach students patience and diligence, 2 virtues that are almost absent in our society today. Introducing difficult texts like Shakespeare is the way to reclaim these forgotten virtues in the next generation. Some might also object that Shakespeare cannot be relevant to the cultural problems we face today. Dana Dusbiber, a high school English teacher in California, wonders why we, quote, continue to cling to one white man's view of life as he lived it so long ago, unquote. This would be a valid concern, if not for the fact that all men are connected by a thread that runs throughout the ages of history. As the poet John Donne wrote, no man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. We cling to Shakespeare not because his perspective is unique, but because it is universal. The plays of Shakespeare could not be more relevant to today's society if they had been written last night. Othello explores the tensions between races and the nature of jealousy. Romeo and Juliet, the foolishness of young love. The Merchant of Venice, the consequences of hasty decisions. You cannot say that such things are irrelevant. We see the results everywhere we look. The modern student can learn from this old white man because of one thing that is more important than his race or his gender. He was human. With such obvious proofs of the relevance and efficacy of Shakespeare's writings, it becomes even more appalling that they should be overlooked in college curriculum. His plays show us what masterful storytelling looks like. They develop our comprehension skills. They even give us insight into the story of the gospel. Few other authors have combined beauty and meaning in such a powerful way. Shall we allow this gift of God to disappear from higher education? Heaven forbid. It is my hope that in the coming years, there will be a great revival of the Bard in our universities. But it all starts with you. Bring Shakespeare to your dinner table. Take him on car trips. Teach your children to love his stories. By doing this, we will cultivate a society rich in all the things Shakespeare has to teach us. For ignorance is a curse indeed, but knowledge can give us wings. Thank you.
We are moving on now. We've had the ladies of the competition. Now we are moving into the gentlemen of the competition, and we have Michael Hoffman, who is going to be presenting next. And Mr. Hoffman has said that he is a high school sophomore. He is a Roman Catholic from Erie, Pennsylvania, and he is actually a published author, having submitted articles at Circe Institute and Crisis Magazine. And his speech this evening, it's the university model, and a prolonged adolescence.
In the modern world, the mark of a well-educated person is a paper with a mark on it that says educated. We live in a world where college is seen as a necessity for a full life. Good jobs, status in society, and more all seem to be dependent on it. When I think of the college establishment, though, I don't think of education. I think of the pajama boy ad, a photo of a young man wearing PJs that was meant to get young people excited about Obamacare back in 2013. This and the infamous Life of Julia commercial proposed a new idea of coming of age. The idea that with the assistance of the government, people could live out their young adulthood as a second childhood. The public rebelled against these advertisements. The two were both met with strong backlash at the time when they were released and have been targets for derision even up until recently. People scorn Pajama Boy because there's something grotesque about the fact that new adults are doing nothing with their fresh talent and youthful energy. They're burning the most valuable years of their lives in prolonged immaturity and adolescence. I propose that the culprit is the modern university method, and that until we stop making colleges responsible for our success in life and take our young adult lives into our own hands, we can only expect to see more and more young people living sterile, meaningless lives. The traditional university model is distinct for its thick, bureaucratic nature. It's represented on paper by credit hours and grades, inherently meaningless and subjective numbers that supposedly quantify knowledge. Yet this system allows colleges to turn learning and take it into an expensive commodity that is purchased on a unitary level. The already lengthy process of getting a bachelor's degree is often drawn out by the fact that many colleges actively encourage students not to decide on a major in their first year, but instead to experiment with as many different expensive college courses as possible. Colleges also offer and endorse many pointless therapeutic degree paths in things like gender studies, whatever that is, that offer no return on the student's massive investment and often force them to come back to pursue a more practical option later on or go on to graduate school at twice the price. It makes perfect sense, though, that a college wouldn't be interested in encouraging planning and hard work. After all, the longer students remain at college, the more money they leave behind. Meanwhile, the students, who usually have no real goal to direct their hard work towards, settle into a second childhood and slowly finish their degrees, often falling into all kinds of sinful concupiscence along the way. About 50% of women in college end up with unplanned pregnancies, which often force them to drag out their college education even longer. 37% of college students also are caught or admit to regularly using illegal drugs or habitually abusing alcohol. A friend of mine stated that college was like dipping his soul in oil. I think it's impossible, he said, to not come out of it as a worse person. This seems to fit with statistics that show that 70% of young adults who enter college as professing Christians leave with little to no faith. Far from providing young adults with the wisdom and knowledge they need to do God's will, colleges seem to encourage immaturity, immorality, and ignorance. I would argue that as people who believe that education isn't just a series of boxes to be checked, and that a virtuous life is the most valuable thing anyone can have, we need to fight against the modern college system. We can look into history and see that young adults don't need to be pajama-clad pagans who live immature lifestyles while going to school on government money. We can look back only a few generations and see the age group we now refer to as college kids providing for families of their own, fighting wars, running businesses, and taking responsibility for their own lives. There's no question that young adults are more than capable of being adults, so why aren't they? I've heard the argument that just because young adults can be responsible doesn't mean they should be rushed into that role. I would respond to that with the question, is an 18-year-old an adult or a child? If 18-year-olds aren't meant to take on the role of adults, then why are they called adults? Why are they registered for the draft? Why are they allowed to vote? We know well that education isn't something to be bought. No one needs college to become educated in a world where books, online courses, and lectures on every subject are made readily available to the curious mind. If we do feel the need to buy the degree that college offers, we should pursue it with purpose and priority, and not allow ourselves to be tempted by an easy life. If traditional college was a prerequisite for greatness, we would not remember Jane Austen, Benjamin Franklin, Abigail Adams, Michael Faraday, and many more men and women from all walks of life who took responsibility for their own lives and educations. The exact thing that the college establishment, due to its corruption and greed, encourages students not to do. It's time for this generation of pajama boys to follow in the footsteps of these great people, and like St. Paul, to put aside childish things.
Our final speaker this evening is Marshall Leary. So he wants to let everybody know he lives in Alabama with 2 brothers and no sisters. This is his 4th year with Kepler, and he has a speech this evening called An Apology of Darkness.
Thank you. In recent years, an idea has become popular among the evangelical Christian community. This idea takes many forms, from your Christians shouldn't read Harry Potter, to some more absurd notion that PureFlix garbage is the ideal form of Christian media. This notion is, of course, that we should not read or write dark stories. This is a ridiculous notion. It primarily came about by the secular world taking Hollywood and the media captive, so Christians felt the need to make a safe little bubble to hide their families from the evil culture. My thesis is this: Christian stories are not dark enough. We must make Christian media darker. Dostoevsky understood this when he wrote one of the Christian masterpieces of his time, Crime and Punishment, a story about a literal axe murderer who falls in love with a prostitute. Dante wrote a story about going to hell and examining the torment of the damned. Song of Roland is about the bloodiest book I've ever read, and it's a historical Christian classic. So what's the point of bringing these gruesome classics into a discussion about how media should be now? The point is that there are scarcely better and more important books than these. These books are not great in spite of their darkness, but because of it. Dante wrote the Inferno as the first part of 3 in his Divine Comedy. He must descend into hell so that he can see his desperate need for a savior in order to be purified of his sin in purgatory and to ascend into heaven. Dostoevsky writes an incredibly dark psychological thriller to show how great the power of self-sacrificial love must be to be able to conquer such darkness. The Song of Roland is perhaps a little less profound, but we get to see Christian heroes killing pagan villains, and it inspires, as C.S. Lewis puts it in Mere Christianity, quote, that kind of gaiety and wholeheartedness which accompanies courage, end quote. But doesn't dark media desensitize us to darkness? Wouldn't we be better off forgoing television such as Stranger Things in favor of media that only shows us those things which we strive to be? So I have a book recommendation for you. It's called The Bible. Judges 19 describes men of the tribe of Benjamin plotting to rape a male Levite visitor. So the old man he's staying with gives them his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine, both of whom they proceed to rape to death. The Levite then cuts his concubine's body into pieces and sends each piece to a separate tribe of Israel. I suppose that story is far more appropriate than Stranger Things. The point is this: the Lord felt a necessity for these gruesome stories to be included in his holy scriptures. Why? Because the Lord does not pick and choose which aspects of reality he wishes to portray. He shows us the whole of it, the good and the bad, the broken and the whole, the dark and the light. He did not die to redeem one particular aspect of his creation, but the whole. The central event in history was God being made man, being betrayed by his disciple, who was possessed by the devil himself, having his back torn out with scourges and whips and being nailed to a tree, dying the most gruesome and painful death in history. And yet without this, there would be no glorious resurrection, no redemption. G.K. Chesterton once wrote, quote, "If the characters are not wicked, the book is. We must tell stories the way God does. Stories in which a sister must float her little brother on a river with nothing but a basket between him and the crocodiles. Stories in which murderers are blinded on donkeys and become heroes. Stories with dens of lions and fiery furnaces and lone prophets laughing at kings and priests and demons. Stories with heads on platters. Stories with courage and crosses and redemption. Stories with resurrections." End quote. It is not only permissible, but necessary that Christian stories should be dark. We must change the Christian media of our time. It must be darker. I will give you 3 reasons for this. Firstly, the world is a dark and broken place. St. John writes in his first epistle, quote, "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him." And yet, as I have just demonstrated, the Bible teaches us not to love the things of the world by showing us the darkness of those things. There seems to be a ridiculous notion in Christian culture that if a film is not appropriate for the whole family, it is not appropriate at all. This notion has given birth to pathetic media like that which we see on Pure Flakes. This is stupid, and the reason it's stupid is because the world isn't really appropriate for the whole family. If something exists, the Lord necessarily has something to say about it, and so should we. Secondly, as I alluded to earlier, we cannot have redemption without darkness. Without darkness, there is nothing to be redeemed. That is why the Gospels are stories filled with tax collectors and prostitutes, with murder and persecution and immorality of every kind. Thirdly, if we have nothing to say about that which is dark, the world's opinion about the darkness will capture the culture. The reason sex and violence and foul language invade our world today is because Christian media is scared of these things. In many Christian movies, we see relationship drama, but don't worry, fornication isn't real. Drug dealers do exist, but they'd be caught dead before you see them say a swear word. The pinnacle of violence is a church getting burned down by a bad, bad atheist. And maybe the pastor dies off screen. More likely, he just goes to the hospital and sees Toby Mac on TV. It's quite pathetic, really. Sex, swear words, and violence are things that do exist, and if we don't show them for what they are in our media, then they will be glorified. So, my friends, let us change the status quo on Christian media. Let us write stories the way God writes them. Not only the way God writes them, but the way every great Christian writer in history has written them. The idea that Christian stories should not be dark, or that somehow the mere portrayal of darkness is a dangerous thing, this idea is dangerous. Let us return to Dante, to Dostoevsky, and to the writers of the Gospels. Thank you.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to announce that the winner of this year's Leonberg speech competition is Miss Haley Hasek. Congratulations, and thank you to all the speakers. You all did a wonderful job. Really proud of all of you. Well done, well done.